So I've got other West Coast artists on vinyl, hip-hop wise, but I put Kendrick because it's around the same time that these albums came out. But this made me realize I need more Bay Area hip-hop on vinyl. I'd love to have a couple of these records, honestly, because there's a couple that I just genuinely enjoy, as I'll talk about. But I got Blind Spotting and Bay Area Metal. Hello world of YouTube, and welcome to the 5th year anniversary special for my show Redacted, the show where I take a look at records that have a solid foundation, but a spotty execution, and making a smoother listening experience out of it all. And this is going to be a handful of things. It is a more ambitious episode to celebrate 5 years of this as a thank you for watching. But it's also a record, or a project that I pushed back an entire year. I was going to do this last year to celebrate 4 years because it's 4 records coming together, which is fine. The other things I was going to do as a bit for the video, I couldn't do at the time, can't do now. So I was fine. I was in the middle of August. I wanted to do a Weird Al episode. It turned out well. So I get to now talk about what was not my introduction to this artist, but the point at which I decided to go head first into his discography. And when trying to bring them together, I found myself creating a more world built around everything that E-40 brought throughout this incredibly prolific era that sort of acted as a catalyst that would lead to an incredibly prolific set of years following it. I'm talking about the Retrievin series by Bay Area hip-hop icon E-40, the overtime, day, night, and graveyard shifts that I'm pulling together that I'm calling Retrievin.
Nigga, don't act like a that's funky, my nigga. Hope shit don't sit too well with me. I was breathing in the deep. You're a white nigga, this fixture had you beheaded. You ain't gotta like me, but you gotta respect me. I love you, mama.
Now, like I said up at the top, the Retrievin series was my introduction to E-40 as far as, like, diving into his music more. I realize that now that's kind of wild because he did have some bigger tracks in the 2000s, but it was more his features he did with artists like Tech-9 that got me into E-40. I think that he is a great feature artist in general, and I think that, like, it's a good view into his personality and style as a rapper. It gives you a real look at what you're gonna get when spinning his stuff, and it felt nice getting into him around the time that I was trying to. He was doing this idea that he would evolve and experiment with after this into some really lengthy excursions, but he's kept it simple at first. 2 records, double albums were pretty common in hip-hop and in music in general, with the Retrievin Day and Night Shift. 2 records that felt like kind of different flavors of similar ideas. There's a lot of tracks about slinging drugs and growing up in the hood, and, you know, there's different aspects that feel more like picturesque, verse-filled tracks that sort of set a stage, and having these sort of audible palettes that felt in line with the sort of stage they were presenting, day and night. But a year later, E-40 decided to drop 2 more records under the same moniker, Retrievin, but at more extensive points in the day, transforming that duology into a quadrology with the Overtime and Graveyard Shift records. Now, you'll notice with this Redacted possibly which records I do enjoy more out of the quadrology, and it provides a chance for E-40 to sort of expand upon the sonic palette of a day, as it were, with the beat selection and sort of production style that further went into more of the beats on here. You know, Graveyard Shift is super grimy, while Overtime seems to sort of bleed the twilight and days together. And my overall goal with this was to sort of weave those worlds together in ways that sort of made sense, both with song-to-song transitions being a heavy focus on this, and having these moments where you sort of get a scope of an entire day while sprinkling sort of select moments throughout important days of this sort of gangster odyssey, with some tracks having character deaths happen and the effects of them, while also seeing the sort of both sides of gangster life, the more elegant professional side and the dirty gritty side, and having ways to tie E-40 as a person into this world and his piece that he plays within it, with a lot of the tracks and POV that he provides lyrically. I do a ranking of the 4 at the end of the video, FYI. It was kind of nice to honestly push this back a year, because I've been spinning these records intermittently and retooled this Redacted every single time to sort of pull the whole focus into view, and also give a little more of like the variety that E-40 was presenting. I will say this Redacted is a lengthier listen than the typical Redacted, a la the Das Racist one I did in November of last year. But hey, again, we're celebrating the show, we're going bold with it once more, and creating this hour and 47-minute sort of excursion, which again, given I was pulling together 4 already pretty lengthy records, every Revenue Retrievin project is over an hour in length, so I was looking at like easily encroaching on 5 hours worth of E-40 that I was combing through to bring this sort of unified presentation of what he was doing during this era, an era that again I think is pretty fucking choice, even if I think that some of the further excursions after that sort of, I feel, go a little too far, a little too long, a little too often. But there was something special with Revenue Retrievin to me personally. There's a lot of good collaborations that I did cut, and there's some choice tracks that I know people are going to be upset to not see in my version of it at the very least. So I would definitely encourage spinning all 4 of these records on their own too, because they're just a really interesting practice for an artist to do. But regardless, I'm rambling, I'm going on a tangent. My version of E-40's Revenue Retrievin is 27 tracks and an hour and 47 minutes long. So let's show off the track listing before I break it down and tell you why I laid it out the way that I did.
Basically, me and my goons was overseeing my relative's $1 trillion spot. It was my job, I got bread to hold down the whole motherfucking block. Now I'm the nigga, I'm that dude.
Whip it like it's jiffy, all this money, gotta get it. Early morning on the corner.
I put tips on a nigga, we can fade and we can lock up like pits, so we can get off into somebody that don't shoot him a bang bang gangster shit. Most of it was street, God, why did you take my son? Crime scenes and things the choir sings. At the funeral service, they catered it with church. I be beastin'. You be beastin', man? I be beastin'.
Hey, don't underestimate me. A couple of days is all it's gonna take me, cause I'm so serious.
Next few days, partner came up with the art of storytelling. The art of storytelling. The art of storytelling.
And his pockets on slim, so when you go outside, you better watch out for him.
When my little grimy nigga come around, fools get nervous cause he ill. I see him hit you up and do you in. Do you in? Peel ya, that'll be gang goofy, man. They face too familiar. I got people that they don't even know.
We're back in business.
Prepared for the hatred. With my problem solving my patriot. Goon up and get tuned up.
You can't stop the ball like a runaway train. You cannot stop me. I'm on go.
I'm a barbarian, a savage, fully and semi-automatic. Young man, a shuffler with the package. Rock like Lenny Kravitz. On a mission about my male pimp. Hip-hop bunny. Trying to get rich in this collect and stack my money. You can tell that I'm a D-boy by my baller tummy. Sometimes I just I'ma teach you how to sell. I'ma teach you how to sell. Go.
When he come back, she done
Rolling up and squapping like a hockey player. I'm not a knock, I'm the server. Some of you niggas become your own best customer.
No ski mask, let them see my back. No recess, but with that pistol plot. How could I?
Who didn't have a scream? I'm so high, think I can fly. Touch the sky. HILLSIDEMAGAZINE. Vallejo, California, my city. No pity for a sucker can't be.
Nigga, don't act like a bitch. That's why I don't got love for.
I'm so wet, I need a climb me down. Popo trying to dry motherfucker off. My hydroponics will make you cough. Off the underwater.
Candy paint, 84s, built-in buckles, chrome and grill, leather seat, stitching tuck, TV screens and wood.
On the ground, chalupa in a pillowcase. All the neighbors and their grandma know that I'm a case. I'm a burner on my waist. In case I gotta erase, drop pieces of shit like that. I got some real niggas that'll vouch for that. That's right. Might not know how to freestyle, but my rhymes will paint a picture. Fuck being a lyricist. Ride with the thumper. Pimp, I ain't scared. You call it paranoid, I call it prepared. I never be a 4 times 5, 6, 7, 8. We can learn from their mistakes before it's too late. Communication is everything. Conversation is love me to death. I used to be broke when I was a child. Now I'm papered up. I'm what they call a cash cow. Y'all real repeats itself for real, and the things you used to say to me, now I say that to my children.
Now again, to hammer home that sort of attention to sequencing, and having it be this Odyssey-style story, I started it with how Overtime Shift starts with Mr. Flamboyant 2K11, a track to sort of set the stage. I think it's a really good intro track to that project. It has aspects that crop up throughout the other projects as well, like the mobster movie sampling, something that I do lean into to sort of play up and accent the gangster lifestyle that E-40 talks about in this track and throughout parts of this record. Gives E-40 the sort of I'm here bitch track. And I think that if we're talking sequencing-wise, switches incredibly well into Whip It Up. A great collaboration with Gucci. It's also, ironically enough, the second track on Day Shift, and I think acts as a good sort of second track single to sort of have a nice catchy hook and a good collaboration with another popular artist that was big at the time. It's another track that again just sort of talks about his day shift and introducing the listener to what a typical day is for him. And once again, I think that switch up at the end of Whip It Up into He's a Gangster just carries that energy so fucking well. I love that chopped up vocal in the hook, and I think that the beat as a whole gives you that good night scene that I think E-40 just continues to evolve well lyrically. It's funny, given E-40's particular style of rapping and how he presents his unabashed just style in every bar that he spins, dude's got his own sort of just language to his rhyme spinning that I think is very much idiosyncratic, but I think that if, again, we're having the first full day with E-40, I feel like having another relatively catchy, but catchy in a different way track to sort of introduce his gangsta side even more elegantly, I think that this is a good place to take it. I think Messy Marv and the Jacka add to that world building and add to that sort of night scene establishing that the beat does very well. But I think going from that into a banger with Graveyard Shift was the next best place to go. The bass on this track is just indicative of what makes that record so fucking good. The rattle on that is fucking great. It's also the only time of the day to have its own anthem, so if I was going to have the first Graveyard Shift be showcased, I'd have it be the title track, because again, 40 on this track kind of just sets the stage really well. And I think that the collaborations sort of add to that again, sort of overtime, time of the day, you know what I mean? But from there, we jump around days to sort of add to the theatrics of it all, really tell a story or tell stories out of this life that E-40 lives. But one of the things I wanted to do was have a clear sort of start and end to a day. I don't jump around in time, as it were. I will have sort of a day into night or a night into day moment. Like, for example, the next couple tracks, Beastin, Serious, and the Art of Story Tellin, kind of go into each other. Beastin is the start of the story. Serious is the sort of climax, and Art of Story Tellin is sort of the resolve. Beastin's just a banger. There's also a Tarzan reference in the third verse that gets kind of paid off in one of the verses later on in the record. I think this is just a banger that has more of that lifestyle spun into a really good track to sort of put the listener in that overtime before going into a fucking bop. A really good collaboration with T-Pain. One of my favorite E-40 tracks with Serious. It's got this good, lush beat that has an incredible hook by T-Pain and sort of spins E-40's lifestyle into a much more hook-driven experience. Really accenting on the seriousness that his lifestyle does ring out. Talking about the real struggle that he does face and reaffirming that that's a core part of his story and the life that he lives. You know, talking about wanting to ascend from the life that he's lived. You know, the street is hard. You know, he's going through something. And that's sort of fleshed out even more in the resolution of it all in the Art of Story Tellin, a track that sort of takes place the next day and sort of reveals the sort of tragedy in the night that Sirius happened. It's also an album cut to follow a hook that I think transitions really well into itself, while matching the, again, sonic palette that Day Shift leans into, while also sort of tapping into that graveyard shift eeriness that crops up in some of the synth choices on that particular project. But from there, I go into a character piece with
My Lil Grimey nigga.
a track that is more to sort of talk about the darker side of gang life and talking about a particular person that works within or that works with E-40 and his mob crew. I also really love the beat of the song. I think that, again, that rattling bass just adds to the grittiness that enhances the sort of imagery that the title character sort of acts with, and also acts as a good sort of stark juxtaposition between the imagery on that into the track after it, Movin' Organized Business. It also acts as the start of the second day. It is the day after Tragedy. It's a sort of broken down acronym track. Rumble-wise, carries that grittiness from the previous track, but shifts the sound to pivot into something new. The beat on this has that nice synth touch that sort of cuts through the mix and adds to that bass really well. While 40 sort of talks about the missteps he's taken in his life as sort of a shift from the tragedy he's faced into the lifestyle that he leads, and sort of uses that as a bounce back that transitions into Back in Business pretty well, in my opinion. Another track that reintroduces the mobster samples on it that was the intro to Day Shift and acts as a reaffirmation of this second act of having a strong, confident 40 coming back into the fray. That further enhanced on Can't Stop the Boss, a track that has another sharp G-Funk beat and a great soulful hook to it. I love this track. And I think having another collaboration with a big West Coast rapper in the form of Snoop on there is a great touch that I think transitions into a two-piece combo from the Graveyard Shift that I would spin on my own, that I'm bringing into this Redacted, into closing out this second full day with Barbarian, another sample-heavy track that has just a great rumbling low end, and 40 going off. It's the first track from Graveyard Shift, and I think 40 just does his fucking damn thing on it. He goes off. I love his flow on it. I love how gritty he sounds on this beat, and I think that it's a great note for that record to start off on, and I think transitions into My Shit Bang, a single from this era that sort of blends some of the ideas from like Overtime into this by having a really nice low end, but a different type of beat, and a good catchiness to its club-style hook. Love My Shit Bang. Comes really well off the heels of Barbarian, personally, when I was spinning these records outside of the context of in a record setting, and I was like shuffling it around. I liked those two together back in the day, and still do now. And acts as sort of an extension from that second night into an extended overnight, which also acts as sort of a teaching moment within that track, and Barbarian acting as sort of an introduction of a sort of protege style to some of the rapping. Or at least I'm sort of pivoting at that with I'm gonna teach you how to sell dope being the start of the next day, and another moment where it sort of jumps around the next handful of days with I'm gonna teach you how to sell dope. I kind of put this here because it's a banger that sonically pivots from Graveyard Shift really well. Like having the gothic sounding choir behind the beat sort of adds to that extension from Graveyard Shift into a different side of slinging dope, and actually has moments that sort of act lyrically reflective in a different sort of way that, again, 40 kind of feels like narratively would feel after the moments that have preceded parts of this record in particular, before transitioning into a sort of extended night of a night where our operations got interrupted and they got jumped with the two-piece The Server and Knock 'Em Down music, two tracks to sort of bring nightlife into the fray, while also having the sort of storytelling element to both about being given up and jumped during a deal that goes south. And the sort of aftermath of Knock 'Em Down music into Fried sort of works really well because the beat construction of those two tracks sort of introduces those elements from Graveyard Shift, like synth choices, that I think Fried just sort of further enhances, especially with the Tech 9 feature that comes in on that track. But this sort of pivots into the third full day after that with some tracks that sort of get more reflective, talk about 40's life in certain ways, and introduce those elements that become more prevalent throughout the coda of this. Not just living in the now, but reflecting on your deep past. But not straying too far from the mobster life. It's sort of reflecting from a mobster's eyes. With Hillside, Bitch, Wet, and That Candy Paint. Hillside, again, sort of bleeding in the buzzing synths from Fried into another banger, whose hook has some catchiness to it, but leads into an even catchier track, Bitch with Too Short. A great collaboration between the two that sees Too Short and E-40 getting sexual. They're hooking up, and they talk about that in this track. Sort of a pivot away from the gang life, but a sort of different slice of 40's life, or at least a day of that. The night track from this day being Wet, a track that I selected partially because, again, I think it bleeds well from Bitch, and also sort of talks more about the sexual side of Wet, and also using it as a metaphor for, you know, staying strapped and also just being high. It's a pretty decent track from the Night Shift that I also think bleeds really well into the Graveyard Shift track from this day that I chose, That Candy Paint. Another collaboration with a legend, Bun B, that I also think comes together well. It's got that chopped up style in its beat that Bun B would be using, and I think the two of them come together and make a really fucking banger of a track. It has that low-end worship that Graveyard Shift does, but in a much different fashion that I think works incredibly well. Before pivoting into the final stretch of the record of various different aspects of days throughout 40's world that he's painted on here that stood out as sort of ending moments to this for one reason or another. A track that presents that gangster swagger, but from an older mindset, and talking about changing that life a little more directly, and also glorifying his fame in All I Need after that further extends transcending that gangster life and reflecting on the fame that you've gotten, and that's sort of what, while that was what brought you this, what the avenue you've been pursuing has brought you that's made it better for you. You know, talking about how he has lived this life, but also talking about the potential for something else. The night following that being a moment where he still flexes that he stays strapped and he always stays prepared for whatever the streets or life may bring to him. A track whose beat really leans into some of the elegance seen on parts of Overtime Shift, and also adding to some of that low-end rumble to transition into the Graveyard before shifting to the overtime after that, Born in the Struggle, a moment that sort of talks about life that he's lived that brought him to this point. A track that I think, as far as sequencing goes, is probably my favorite part in this story, because from Born in the Struggle, I pivot into E-40, the sort of follow-up to that track, and some of the sample choices chosen for that, and further showcasing who the fuck he is and the type of guy that he is, that acts as the penultimate track to I Love My Momma, a track that closes this off on a more sentimental note, and another aspect of his life that he would, or another part of his person in his life who he wouldn't have gotten nearly as far without, and how much he loves his mama. And I think it's a good sentiment to close this saga out on, in my opinion. A story of drugs, getting jumped, slinging dope, and the life of chaos that could be, with 40 at the centerpiece of it all. What did you think of it? Was this interesting to you? Was it not? Let me know in the comments down below. If you would like to listen to it. Again, it is a lengthy listen, but I think worth it in my opinion. It's an interesting look into E-40, the storyteller and the artist, with a variety of beats that I think he works really well with, and some collaborations that I think together very successfully. If I were to rank the albums from 4 to 1, least to most favorite, I would say Night Shift is probably my least favorite. It's the one that I spin the least. Not to say that it's bad. In fact, when making this Redacted, I realized how many of the tracks on here I did love and how good this instrumental palette does at creating like a nighttime scene sonically. Then I would go probably Overtime Shift. Similarly to Nighttime, though, I think that the beat selection on here acts as a good sort of transitional time in the day that I think E-40 uses to craft a handful of tracks that lean into more the aspects of reflecting on the grind and how lengthy it's been very successfully and incredibly well. I just, again, don't spin it as much as Day Shift or Graveyard Shift. I think Day Shift just has some really good catchy-ass moments with some choice collaborations that 40 does successfully, and also utilizes other components like the Mobster movie sampling incredibly effectively, in my opinion. But Graveyard Shift, man, the bass on that record is incredible. If there were two I would want to own, it would probably be Day Shift and Graveyard Shift. I love the sonic palette of Graveyard Shift. And again, similarly to Day Shift, it just has some collaborations that I think come together successfully well. So very successfully. You know, while also just going off on some moments in ways that he does on parts of the other Revenue Retrievin series. But man, like Barbarian, god damn, that track is incredible. But anyway, my thoughts, Revenue Retrievin, all out there. Go spin them. Both my Redacted and otherwise. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let's also talk about Redacted, because again, this was a celebration of 5 years of this show. Are you just now seeing me? Let me know your favorite Redacteds in the comments down below. This is an insane show that I love making, and I'm never going to stop making. So if you liked it, give it a like. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week, depending on what I've got going on. Thank you again so very much for watching. I've been Viral Rack. You guys look at these lives and situations, and I'll see you another day.